The debate over gun rights in America has taken a major turn this week after a United States appeals court issued a ruling that could have far-reaching consequences for the Second Amendment and the future of firearm regulation. On September 2, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed a lower court decision and upheld the long-standing federal ban on machine guns, declaring once again that such weapons fall outside the scope of constitutional protection. The case centered on a man named Tamori Morgan, who was charged with illegally possessing a machine gun. A trial judge had previously dismissed the charges, concluding that under recent Supreme Court rulings, the government had not demonstrated a clear historical tradition justifying the restriction. That lower court ruling set off alarm bells among lawmakers, prosecutors, and advocates because it appeared to open the door for broader challenges to the ban on automatic weapons. But the appeals court has now closed that door, at least for the time being. The panel of judges made it clear that the federal prohibition, which traces its roots back to the National Firearms Act of 1934 and was strengthened in 1986, is consistent with constitutional precedent. They drew heavily from the Supreme Court's 2008 Heller decision, which famously recognized an individual right to keep and bear arms but also specified that the Second Amendment does not extend to what the court called dangerous and unusual weapons. Machine guns, the 10th Circuit concluded, remain exactly that. They are not in common use for lawful purposes like self-defense, and therefore, they can be restricted without violating the Constitution. The court also rejected the idea that the 2022 Brune decision altered this analysis. In Brune, the Supreme Court struck down a New York law that required special justification to carry a firearm in public, but the 10th Circuit said nothing in Brune suggested a departure from Heller's reasoning about what kinds of weapons fall outside constitutional protection. This ruling comes at a politically charged moment in the United States. Gun rights groups had hoped that recent Supreme Court decisions would open new opportunities to challenge long-standing restrictions. Advocates of gun regulation, on the other hand, feared a wave of litigation that could dismantle decades of firearms law. The decision by the 10th Circuit reassures supporters of gun control that the federal ban on machine guns remains intact. However, it also raises the possibility that the Supreme Court could one day take up the question directly, since different circuits have now issued rulings affirming the same principle. For now, there is a strong judicial consensus that automatic weapons are not covered by the Second Amendment, but whether that consensus will endure is still uncertain. The history of the machine gun ban is itself a fascinating story. During the Prohibition era, automatic weapons became infamous as the weapons of choice for organized crime syndicates. Images of gangsters with Thompson submachine guns fueled public demand for federal regulation. That demand culminated in the National Firearms Act of 1934, which imposed strict taxes and registration requirements on machine guns. In 1986, Congress went further, prohibiting civilians from owning newly manufactured machine guns altogether. Only those registered before that date remain legal, and even then, they are tightly controlled. These laws have been credited with drastically limiting the presence of automatic weapons in the United States. Unlike semi-automatic rifles or handguns, machine guns are rarely seen outside of military or law enforcement contexts. Supporters of the appeals court ruling argue that the dangers of automatic weapons justify their prohibition. A machine gun can fire hundreds of rounds per minute, making it vastly more destructive than typical firearms. Public safety officials have long warned that widespread availability of such weapons would be catastrophic. Mass shootings, already a grim reality in America, could become even deadlier if machine guns were legal. The 10th Circuit emphasized that the government's responsibility to protect public safety aligns with its authority to regulate weapons that pose exceptional risks. For these judges, the Constitution's protection of individual rights does not extend so far as to allow unlimited access to weapons of war. Gun rights activists, however, are not satisfied with this outcome. Some argue that the Second Amendment was written precisely to guarantee access to military-grade weapons, so that the people could defend themselves not only against criminals but also against tyranny. For them, the ban on machine guns represents government overreach and a betrayal of the framers' intent. They point out that semi-automatic rifles, which are legal and widely owned, are already highly lethal. In their view, drawing a legal distinction between semi-automatic and fully automatic weapons is arbitrary. These arguments are likely to fuel ongoing litigation, even if the courts remain unsympathetic for now. Politically, the ruling provides ammunition for both sides. Advocates of gun control will celebrate it as a victory for common sense and public safety. They will argue that it proves courts are capable of balancing constitutional rights with modern realities. Opponents, however, will use it as a rallying cry, urging the Supreme Court to step in and assert a broader reading of the Second Amendment. With the nation already divided on gun policy, the decision adds another layer of intensity to an already heated debate. Legal experts are watching closely to see whether the Supreme Court will eventually take up the issue. The High Court has been selective in its Second Amendment docket, but its conservative majority has shown a willingness to expand gun rights in recent years. If a case challenging the machine gun ban reaches the justices, the outcome could be unpredictable. For now, though, the 10th Circuit ruling stands, and the ban remains enforceable across the country. The story of the machine gun ban also highlights the tension between history and modernity in constitutional law. The Supreme Court's Brune decision instructed lower courts to evaluate gun laws based on the nation's historical tradition of regulation. That test has proven controversial because it requires judges to look back to the 18th and 19th centuries to assess laws addressing modern weapons. Critics say the approach is unworkable, while supporters insist it is the only way to remain faithful to the Constitution. The 10th Circuit navigated this challenge by pointing out that even if machine guns did not exist in the founding era, the principle of regulating unusually dangerous weapons did. In other words, the government has always had the authority to limit arms that go beyond what ordinary citizens need for self-defense. As this legal battle continues, the American public remains sharply divided. Some communities see gun rights as fundamental to freedom and identity, while others see gun regulation as essential to safety and survival. Machine guns, perhaps more than any other type of firearm, symbolize the extremes of this debate. They represent both the fear of unchecked violence and the desire for unrestrained liberty. The 10th Circuit's ruling does not resolve that tension, but it does set the legal framework moving forward. At least in the eyes of the courts, machine guns remain outside the Second Amendment's protection. In the months ahead, the Morgan case will likely be cited in courtrooms and political debates across the country. Prosecutors will feel more confident pursuing charges under the machine gun ban, while defense attorneys may continue to challenge its constitutionality, hoping for a different outcome in another circuit. Congress may also seize on the ruling to reinforce or expand regulations, while gun rights groups may push for legislation in the opposite direction. The issue is not going away, and the 10th Circuit's decision ensures it will remain a live controversy for years to come. In summary, the appeals court's decision to uphold the federal machine gun ban is a landmark moment in the ongoing clash over guns in America. It reflects both continuity with past precedent and adaptation to new legal standards. It underscores the judiciary's role in balancing individual rights with collective security. And it demonstrates once again that the Second Amendment, while robust, is not absolute. Whether the Supreme Court will eventually weigh in is an open question. But for now, the message is clear: machine guns, in the eyes of the courts, remain too dangerous, too unusual, and too destructive to be considered part of America's protected arsenal.